All right, so today is Tuesday, June 9th, and we're going to be covering the gallbladder. And I want to speak a little bit to using the points, just very briefly. There's a kind of a continuum of approach, and that's going to change, and that's going to be defined largely by who you are as a practitioner, your personality, what you're about in life, right? What you feel your role is as a practitioner. And then with patient to patient, you may find yourself on a different place in this continuum between very shamanistic and very like heart guided and very technical and prescriptive. And you'll find that from patient to patient, different patients are kind of going to guide you to be somewhere along this continuum. And so the upside is you can be very effective no matter where you are on this continuum, right? I've been to practitioners who are very technical. I've been to practitioners who are very kind of more shamanistic and very loose. The thing is, though, what you have to be mindful of is that if you are more like naturally predisposed to be towards this end, you want to make sure that your intuitive hits, your like heartfelt connections are grounded in phenomena, because otherwise your treatments can get sloppy and disorganized. And the downside of being over here, I need to just adjust my video for a second here. The downside of being on this end, or the things you have to be mindful of, are being soulless and disconnected from the patient. And you're more about the theory of what's happening with the patient than what's happening with the patient. And by that I mean, like, how is the patient experiencing what they're experiencing, right? So the longer you do this work, the more you're going to be formulating your treatment plans while the patient is sitting in the reception area. And after you've greeted them, you look at the look on their face, you hear the sound of their voice, you see the color, right, to some degree. You get a sense of their emotional presentation. There's something about the way they're speaking. There's something about the way they're sitting, their posture, things like this, that are going to kind of wash over you, and just the subtle phenomena that washes over you that's going to guide you to start thinking about something. And generally what I want that to be is like, you begin kind of like thinking about, what do I want to explore in the treatment room, right? Not just the conclusion that you're jumping to, like, oh, IDs, or oh, AE, or oh, yeah, definitely want to touch metal today. You really want to use that as a springboard for further inquiry, to ask more questions of the patients, to test out your hunches, right? To embody the energetics of the elements and then present them to the patient that you suspect might be an area where they're wobbling. So I just wanted to point that out because, as I go through this material, especially as I was going through the gallbladder, and I don't know why I tracked a lot of wood CFs, I realized that there's a lot in the notes that are very accurate. And what you'll find is as you practice more and more, you're going to reach the decision to use these points by a lot of different ways, and ways that sometimes aren't even in the textbook, right? But I want you to have like a basic grounding and understanding of, not just what each point does, but the nature of each point based on its point category. This is really important. Its point category, its elemental nature, maybe something about the name, right, which may speak to its location. It may speak to some myth or legend, in order to create some evocative story that gives you a sense of like a quality of being, right? Some aspect of being, like like liver 3, supreme rushing, which we'll get to later. What do they mean by supreme rushing? They mean the best kind of rushing that's like like you're moving at a brisk pace, but not so fast that you're stumbling over yourself and tripping yourself up, right? But not, but you know, but there's a quality of like ease to it, but not so much ease that you're just strolling like on the beach with not a care in the world. Like you want to have like not a care in the world in your heart, but you don't want it to like slow you down. You want to be able to like stay moving, right? And other points on the gallbladder, like, you know, yin portals of the foot, which we'll get into, which is like gallbladder 44. Like it's a Jingwell point, it's a metal point, it's on a yang meridian, it's at the tip of the toe. You know, it's dealing with the gallbladder official, right? So, you know, I want you to start thinking, also the name, like it's a yin portal on the foot. Right, so I want you guys to start thinking about how the name, the location, all the correspondence of the officials and the channels that it's on, that is, you know, what kind of climatic factor is it susceptible to being aggravated by? What's its domain of function on a body, mind, spirit level, right? And its elemental nature, and maybe its antique point nature, and where it is on the body, right? I mean, you know, gallbladder 44 is very different than gallbladder 21. Which is like up here on the shoulder, right? Or gallbladder 1, which is on the head. So I want you to start thinking about these aspects of the points, because that gives you insight as to what the points are about, the state of consciousness they represent, the physical functions that they perform, the capacities that they enable us to do in the world, right? Or the way to be within. And the more you kind of take that in, and give yourself years to do this, but the more you take this in, the more you're going to be in the presence of a patient, and a certain official is going to show up, or a certain point is going to just start to just arise in your consciousness that somebody is resonating with, because this is a resonant medicine, right? Everything is about, you know, what resonates with each other. Excuse me one second. Right? Everything is about what resonates. That's why, you know, matching can be really helpful, you know, when you're working with your patients, because your posture, your voice, your quality of presence resonates in a familiar way, and that's going to help open them up. It's going to help you gain rapport, and then they're going to start revealing things that they never have revealed before, like not to even their closest friends, maybe even not to their partners, right? And that's an honorable thing, you know, to be entrusted with that and to hold the space for that, right? I think it's a, you know, not in a religious way, but I think it's a very holy thing. And it's a sacred thing. And it can be fun. It doesn't have to be sacred, reverence doesn't have to be heavy and serious. It can be lighthearted and beautiful. Right? So I want you to think about these things as you're reading, excuse me, reading about the points. Any questions about what I've just said? Does anyone feel like they won't be up for it?
Up for what? The spiritual aspect of healing?
Any of it, like being able to figure this out.
Absolutely, I'm worried about that.
Good. That means you're paying attention. So,
well, and there's like so many layers. So
yes.
It's like sometimes I can get something on one layer, and then the next time I look at it, it's like I'm understanding it on a whole different layer. And it's like,
yes.
Oh my gosh, how am I ever going to sort through this in the real world?
Yeah. Well, the way you're going to sort through it in the real world is you're going to have access to their tongue, their pulse, palpation, you know, so you're going to have a lot more feedback, because right now it's just, you know, information that's just sort of coming in, you know, on paper and words. It's not alive, right? I mean, I'm trying to make it like a little tiny bit alive through my speaking about it, and maybe hopefully transmitting something through the screen from my heart. But when you're with your patient, it will come. And, you know, it just reminds me of that Bruce Lee saying, you know, when I first started doing martial arts, a punch was just a punch and a kick was just a kick. And then after doing martial arts for 10 years, I realized, oh my gosh, you know, a punch isn't just a punch and a kick isn't just a kick. And then after 20 years, I realized a punch is just a punch and a kick is just a kick. So you're going to go through these phases of where like, oh my God, this is like so complicated. oh my, like, how do I sort through this? Like, there's all this phenomena going on with my patient. Like, where do I start? And so that's what we're going to guide you through in the process in the clinic. Because we're going to actually help you how to sort through it. And the main tools you're going to use are the tools that I mentioned about the points, the ways of thinking about the points. And the other is the treatment planning rubric, right? And through your SOAP notes, right? So, you know, you start with your observations and, you know, what is it that you feel like you want to do with this patient? And then you translate that into a Chinese medicine goal or story. And then you come up with a diagnosis, right? Oh, you know, and you start with directionality, like, you know, okay, well, are the symptoms going up? Are they symptoms like being stuck in? Are the symptoms like going down? Are the symptoms like spinning around? You know, like there's direction. Qi has directionality to it. So you're going to start with yin and yang, and are things more yin or things more yang, right? Then you're going to look at the elements. Then you're going to look at the officials, and you have all this knowledge about the correspondences and things like this. So, you know, it sounds like a lot to say in one moment, but you really do have all the tools you need, you know, based on your foundations courses and the CFEA courses, and hopefully a little bit from this course and the treatment planning course, like with Hunter, right? So you're going to be, it's, you know, it's kind of like learning to juggle while sitting on a unicycle. But after a while, you know, it gets a little bit easier. And I don't want you at all to be focused on your comfort. Like, that's a trap. Like, if you feel confident and if you feel comfortable, like, alhamdulillah, that's great for you. But that's not a sign of doing it right. So if that's like in the back of your mind, your sort of mini goal to be comfortable and confident, like, you're wasting your time. It's a trap of the ego, right? The ego doesn't like to be in the midst of the unknowing, but that's where the juice is. So don't worry about being comfortable. Don't worry about feeling confident. It's not about that. It's about just focusing on the patient and giving it your best shot and learning from your mistakes, learning from the things that don't yield the results the way you'd like, right? I can't tell you how many patients, like, I go in, I'm solid diagnosis, I feel like I've got rapport with the patient, and I've made, I think, you know, really grounded, phenomenological decisions, and it doesn't work out. You know, I mean, there's times when, like, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm grasping at straws, miracles happen. Right? So the key is not about that. The key is about, can you learn about how to move forward and not take it so personally, which takes, you know, depending on your disposition, you know, may take 5 minutes or 5 years. So that's my little spiel. That's my little sermon in the beginning. All right. Yes, fake it till you know it type of person. Yes, fake it till you make it. There's a lot to be said for that. And, you know, I treat a number of practitioners, and, you know, every one of them, including myself, goes through this period where you just feel like an utter fraud. Like, if my patients only knew what a fraud I was. But everybody goes through that, you know, because it's not like we're making widgets. You know what I mean? Like, I have a friend, like, she retired now, but she used to work on an assembly line, right? And she loved that, right? You know, she was responsible for, like, her, like, mechanical widget making activities, and I would blow my brains out, right? So there's no, like, well, I felt really confident on the assembly line today, and oh, I really felt good with, like, you know, the 160th radio I put together. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like, but boy, 43 was tough. You know, I mean, there's none of that. You guys have not signed up for assembly line widget making. You know, you're dealing with people who are wildly unpredictable, especially when under stress. Yeah. So, you know, don't worry about being comfortable or confident or any of that nonsense. It's a trap from your ego. All right. So, yes, be like water. Yes. Yes. All right. So, gallbladder, summary of functions. So I did update my summary of functions yesterday evening. So if you've downloaded and printed out one from before, maybe, I don't know, like 5:30 p.m. yesterday, I've updated it. I am a tinkerer. Um, so just to go over the basics of it, excuse me. It's it's an extraordinary food. The gallbladder is a really fascinating organ system. So it's an extraordinary foo, along with the brain and the uterus and the marrow. And it's extraordinary because it's the only young organ that stores a pure substance, and that's the bile that comes from the liver, right? So it's interesting that and we'll flesh this out more later, but there's an interesting analogy that, or I guess maybe a metaphor, I don't know, I can't tell the difference, but sometimes the gallbladder is compared to a tiger, and the fact that a tiger it stalks its prey and then it waits for the right moment to pounce, and when it pounces with ferocity and complete commitment, like utter conviction, right? I think in one text somebody likens it to a falcon that just circles around like looking for prey, and then it like swoops in with ferocity and decisiveness, and it just goes for it. But it's not just going for it all the time. There's this wait and then leap and then wait and then pounce, right? And so if you think about the injection of bile into the duodenum or duodenum, I never know how to pronounce that, but if you think about like how the bile is released, it waits and waits and waits, and then it releases it, and then it waits and waits and waits, and then it releases it, right? It's not like, should I, shouldn't I? No, it just like goes for it, like it knows. And we actually don't completely understand how it decides when to do it. Like, what we know basically what kind of stimulates it, right? But we don't know like exactly why it waits until it waits to release its bile into the small intestine to emulsify the fats. And it emulsifies fats, which are like the hardest things to digest, right? So all the densest, most hard to transform substances, this is what the gallbladder says, yeah, let me at it, right? So that tells you a lot about the gallbladder personality, right? They're the ones that like, they see that tree that looks like, if I climb that tree, I'll probably die. Yeah, that's the tree I want to climb, right? Right? That's the mountain I want to climb, right? Why do you climb the mountain? Because it's there, right? So, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So on the body, it's the only young organ that doesn't deal also with waste or with food or drink or transporting nourishment. I think that that's really interesting, right? So it's not a waste station for what do you call it, turbid or impure substances. It's a way station for pure substance. It stores temporarily a pure substance, and then it injects it into the small intestine to help digest and transform things that are hard to manage. So it stores and excretes bile made in the liver, right? So I just wanted to mention a little bit about bile. Well, actually, I just wanted to mention first, it's so the Nanjing chapter 49, it states that that bile is full of essences, and when it leaves a gallbladder, it does not leave the body. And that was interesting, right? So like, when when the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine are done working on what they're doing, and the bladder too, right, are done working on what they've worked on, those substances then eventually are excreted out of the body, but not the bile. And I was like, what? And it turns out that if your body is healthy, somewhere around 95% of your bile gets reabsorbed in the ileum, which is weird, right? So it's actually like a quasi-recycled substance. And I didn't really know that until recently. So I thought that that was really fascinating. Yeah, so it's, you know, its character, right, Don, implies a person standing on a high ground, you know, looking around. And then there's a mouth with something coming out, and that implies speech, right? So it's not meant to be quiet. It's not meant to be particularly noisy and chatty either, but it does mean that, like, see something, say something, right? I hate that phrase, but in this case, if you take it out of, like, you know, its context of, like, being fearful of terrorists, um, you know, like, see something, say something. Like, you see something and then you respond. So, you know, again, like yin and yang types, generally you'll know, because the yin types, people who generally relate more with the zang, are going to be more internal in their processing, right? Like, you know, you ask a liver CF, you know, like, what do you want to eat for dinner tonight? They're going to go, right? A gallbladder CF's not going to do that. A gallbladder CF's going to be like, well, we had fish yesterday, and I know what I have in the pantry, and you know that eggplant is probably on its last legs. We should probably do something with that. And I'm kind of in the mood for something maybe savory, right? You know, that's more like the foo, right? The foo they're gonna, like, and again, this is a, you know, just a very generalization, right? Not every foo is like this, not every zong is like that, but more often than not, you know, the zong types are going to process more internally, and the foo types are going to process more externally, right? I just remember these two teachers. They're married to each other, Clayton Spivey and Edna Brandt. And it was kind of funny. Edna was describing, like, you know, they're thinking about, like, where they want to go out to, like, this restaurant, and you know, Clayton is very like yin, and Edna's very yang. Like, she's like, I'm thinking, you know, like, we haven't had pizza in a while, and you know, but there's also that Chinese place that just opened up. And she's like, well, what do you want, Clayton? Clayton's just like sitting there, and then Edna goes on for a little bit, and then Clayton's just, and Edna's just like, well, she's like, I'm thinking, you know, like, right? She's doing her thinking inside. But like, the gallbladder, you know, is meant to actually have some commentary on what it sees, right? By virtue of the liver's capacity to open to the world via the eyes. And the gallbladder, you know, the foo of whatever zong we're talking with, you know, if it opens to the ears, like the kidney, the bladder helps to manage that, right? The gallbladder helps to manage what we see. And interestingly enough, right, the foo, their entry or exit points are all on the face or the head, right? Because they deal with the sense organs directly, right? And they help the zong process the data, the sensory information that comes in, right? So the Don, the character, which also has the flesh radical, which means it exists in physical space, it's like a person standing on high ground, so it has perspective. So perspective, right off the bat, it needs perspective. So if you're not able to make a decision, you could beat yourself up for being indecisive, or you could say to yourself, you know what? Like, I'm dealing with this situation with one hand tied behind my back. This isn't fair. I need greater perspective. What gives us perspective? Well, one thing that gives us perspective is information, right? Right. So, like, if you're not clear about, like, what place to take your car to get, you know, like some mechanical problem worked on, like, you know, what gives you perspective on how to make that decision? Maybe you talk to a friend about it. You know, maybe you get input from, like, other people. Maybe you reach out to a family member. You know, maybe you go on the internet and look on reviews. Maybe you go inside and you meditate on it. I mean, I make a lot of my decisions by meditating on it and then getting some additional information and meditating on it again, right? And that meditation may only take 30 seconds, but, you know, this combination of internal, external. But you need high ground. You need perspective. That's implied right off the get-go. So if you're not able to make a decision, it could be that you just don't have the proper perspective to do so. Yeah.
Is procrastination a gallbladder thing? If people procrastinate a lot, like
It can be, but you also have to look at what's motivating the procrastination. Is it that you're worried that, something's going to come out in a way that's going to make you uncomfortable? That's more earth. Are you fearful that some tragedy is going to befall you, or some, what's that worst case scenario is going to come about? Maybe that's more water. If you're thinking maybe like, I don't have confidence in my skills and ability and I'm going to look foolish, that could be a wood or a fire thing. Right? Like, you may be procrastinating because like the conditions just aren't right yet. I cannot work under these conditions, right? And so that's more metal, right? Right? The friendship. I cannot work under these conditions, right? Bring me a real spatula, right? So it could be different reasons. You have to look at what's motivating the person, right? And their CSOE. Yeah. All right. So it occupies the position of an important official, and who's upright, right? Not just like, well, I don't know, right? They're upright. They're standing. They're occupying their space. They're standing in their authority, and they excel through decision making and wise judgment, right? So what gives someone wisdom? Connection to the liver, which is itself connected to the heart, right? The liver gets its orders from the heart. The gallbladder gets its orders from the liver, right? But you have to make sure that the heart is intact, because, as we know, some generals of the armed forces don't always listen to the commander-in-chief. And that's actually like some orders that the liver should not fulfill, right? This is why there's this caveat in the military that if you're confronted with an order that violates, XYZ rules of conduct, the Geneva, established agreements, right? You can't just, you can't just wake up one day and your colonel says to you, today we're going to like nuke Alabama. You're not expected to carry out that order, right? Right. So there is some wise judgment that needs to be had. So how do you get wise judgment? Experience. How do you get experience? Mistakes, right? So that's why it takes courage. So, and we'll get to that in a bit, right? So so any questions about that before I go on the rest of the physical aspects? Because I know I'm sort of delving into the non-physical aspects as well. All right, so it stores a pure substance, and it transmits a pure substance that also gets reabsorbed into the body. So the gallbladder is frugal and not wasteful. It controls the sinews, and anytime you hear controls the sinews, you want to think about the joints, right? So, the tendons do a lot, maybe like the tendon, like say your Achilles tendon does a lot, but, people aren't really concerned about the area of the Achilles tendon, like between generally the gastrocnemius and the calcaneus. Like where we have trouble is where the tendons attach at either the muscle or the bone, right? So, and these are often either at joints or deep into the belly of or center of the muscle, right? So it controls the sinews, it controls the joints, so it works with the earth that works with the flesh, right? So it mediates between the kidneys, control of the bones, and the earth's spleens control of the muscles, right? So tendons attach, muscle to bone, right? So it's good for the sinews, good for the joints. It provides the chi that's needed to that we need for strong, smooth movement, while the liver provides the blood that's needed for that nourishment, right? So the sinews are sort of made juicy and flexible, right? Like the cartilage is made, moist and flexible and durable by the jinye and the blood, right? It also controls, interesting, the quality and duration of our sleep, right? So, excuse me, if you're somebody that like wakes up a lot earlier than you think you normally should, that's oftentimes a gallbladder issue. It can also be an eight extraordinary vessel issue. But this is really good for people who have a hard time like staying asleep, and getting like really deep sleep. Okay. And then also some quality of our ability to see. So it works with the liver to give us the capacity for vision. So, you know, gallbladder 1 does start right at the eye, lateral to the orbit. So it has a lot to do with disorders of the eyes. It deals a lot with dampness and heat, right? Because it's dealing with bile, which deals with emulsifying fats. So, you know, and it's also part of the Xiaoyang pair of triple heater gallbladder. And, you know, there's a long roundabout way of getting to this, but suffice it to say that the Xiaoyang deals a lot with damp heat. That's sort of in its wheelhouse. So this is going to be good for eye disorders that especially are, you know, that are rooted in a disorder around heat or damp heat, which could be exterior heat, exterior wind heat, or heat in the liver gallbladder channels that spreads through the channel and eventually affects the eyes and other areas that are traversed by the channel. So even though it doesn't communicate directly with the sense organ as the other like Zang Fu organs do, it does deal a lot with the channel that goes up and nourishes and cools the heat, and it's an extraordinary food. So it does have some effect on the brain when it's being harassed by heat or wind heat. All right, so it also clears wind heat and heat from the ear as well as the whole head, because like, you know, this meridian traverses quite a good portion of the lateral aspects of the head. So, you know, things coming from the side, things coming out of the blue, like things coming unexpectedly. That's what wind represents, right? Sudden change, things that are hard to navigate, right? So it clears heat and wind heat from the head, from the ears, from the eyes, and from the liver gallbladder channel, right? And I've included on page 3 a little bit on the common patterns that the gallbladder deals with. And they're basically 4 basic patterns that the gallbladder deals with. One that is the most common is like gallbladder qi deficiency and what's called timidity. And I'll get more into that when we talk about the mind. But this is basically chronic stress stagnates the liver qi. That stagnation that builds up, that obstruction, right, creates pressure, and that pressure generates heat, right? This, like, it's constantly trying to move through the channel and can't. That creates a lot of friction, that creates heat. And then if you add a spleen qi deficient person already because they eat poorly and they don't get much exercise, right? So heat plus all of this weak spleen, then phlegm starts to develop, that corrupts the channels, then gallbladder qi starts to stagnate, phlegm starts to accumulate, patient feels very sluggish, you get what's called a sluggish gallbladder, gallbladder stones, really thick bile. And then over time, they're going to become relatively easily startled. Maybe they have nightmares. They wake up in the middle of the night afraid. They've got heart palpitations and this bitter taste in their mouth, right? That's from that heat rising up into the head. Another common pattern is damp heat in the liver and gallbladder. That's generally exacerbated or to some degree caused by what's called the SAD, the Standard American Diet, right, which is very damp and very hot. You know, everything's got sriracha in it now, right? I mean, you can get mayonnaise with sriracha in it, right? You can get popcorn with sriracha on it, right? Because, you know, damp obtuns the senses, so it dulls our senses, so we become a little bit slow-witted, and we also, like, we're slow to really see what we're seeing. We're kind of slow to taste what we're tasting, right? It dulls our senses. So like now everything has to become much more spicy to gain our interest because our senses have become so dulled. We can't even appreciate the taste of a carrot, right? So, you know, yeah, carrot's really good with sriracha on it, right? Like, so we don't need food anymore. We eat like flavored food, right? So I'm not saying that you shouldn't have, you know, spices and flavors. I mean, you know, they're there. They grow out of the ground. They're for a reason. They are to make life interesting. I mean, we say it's spice something up, right? make it more interesting. But that should not be like every single thing you eat, right? Because then what stands out, right, from the mundane, right? So damp heat in the liver, gallbladder is very common. That also comes from people who are living in very damp, hot environments like the tropics, maybe even the subtropics. You know, like where I was originally born in like New Llano, Louisiana, it's like where damp heat goes to die. So, you know, that, you know, people there like suffer from a lot of like damp heat, right? Like my sister-in-law is Vietnamese, you know, she grew up in a very damp, hot environment, you know, and she's very susceptible like damp, hot conditions, right? So like hyperactive rising gallbladder fire, right? Anger and frustration and stress, plus liver chi stagnation, plus the sad American diet, plus, you know, then that transforms into heat. And then if you've got any like spleen, stomach damp and chi deficiency, you know, we're off to the races. And then over time that festers, that heat rises and goes like, you know, and heat stirs up wind, right? Like if you've been by a bonfire or if you've seen on the, like a hot day, the hood of your car, or like the heat coming off the asphalt, you see how it like shimmers because it's agitating it's moving the air, right? So that's the wind. That heat stirs wind, right? You know, like a wildfire, like you see the wind that it stirs up because it agitates the molecules in the air, and that stirs up a wind. You know, people in our spiritual community has property out in California, and there was a wildfire on the property, and they said they clocked it. This fire was moving at 40 miles an hour. Right? That's some wind, right? And then the last one is phlegm stagnation in the gallbladder. This is extension of damp heat in the liver and the gallbladder, but is exacerbated for a great period of time. And this would be like gallstones so thick that, you know, you have to get your gallbladder removed. This is like hepatitis, you know, damp heat turning into fire, like, you know, viral hepatitis in the liver. Right. Okay. So let me just go over the mind and the spirit, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll get on with the points. Okay. So any questions about the physical aspects of it? Okie dokie. All right. So the mind is interesting. So it says well, it makes the decisions while the liver plans. And so if you read JR's book on the elements and the officials, he likens the liver official to an architect rather than a general of the armed forces. And I like that image also, but like imagine like a general and an architect, like together. They, you know, you can imagine like, you know, the architect is the artist. And again, wood is about creativity, right? So it's birthing something from nothing. And again, when you speak, when you're on that perspective, when you're on that high ground and you're looking around and you speak, that doesn't mean you're just talking. That means you're expressing yourself. So that's giving you also a hint as to what's the antidote for what plagues the liver and the gallbladder, which is stagnation, right? Stagnation is just like the greatest enemy of like the wood officials. So what moves stagnation is expression, creative expression, right? Physical expression, right? So, you know, that requires some courage. You have to like speak up. You have to put pen to paper to write. You've got to, you know, paint what's inside of you, your vision, what you see either out there in the world or in your mind's eye, or your interpretation of what you see. Like when the first impressionists start to paint, like you've seen, maybe if for those of you who are not familiar, like you should look up, you know, impressionist painters, especially like in France, right, where the movement started. And you know, the way they painted was, you know, their impression on the natural world that they see around them, their impression of light and form that comes to them, right, in a very like childlike, pure way. And you know, a lot of their paintings sort of look like what you see if you're sitting inside of a car with the windshield wipers off and it's raining, right? You know, you see this like sort of, it's not so much about the exactitude of like form and color and shape. It's like how like things just kind of like impress upon them, how you know, their impression of, you know, how color and light and shadow and form like just play over their mind's eye. And, you know, we look at those paintings and like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, when they started showing their paintings, I mean, there were like riots in the art world. I mean, people like wanted to set galleries on fire. Like how could you be doing this like wild, crazy, this, you're violating rules, you know? I mean, they like, it was a real big deal. I mean, people were like, going to riot, you know? So, you know, it takes some courage to like put yourself out there to be seen, right? It takes some courage to put, you know, your words to paper, to craft that editorial, that letter to the editor, that craft that email to someone that, you know, your boss, like calling them to accountability. It takes courage to speak to your beloved, to say, you know what, this is what I see, this is what's going on in my mind, and this is what I'm feeling, right? It takes courage to like be yourself in the world. It's easy to kind of just go along to get along, right? I mean, look how a lot of politicians, like the ones that stand out, like the people that really stand out in history are the people that are just like very unique because they've got the guts to be themselves, despite, you know, they're going to rankle, they're going to create conflict, right? That's what wood does. It creates conflict. Like where I lived in New York City for a long time, had these like giant, these slate slabs, you know, for the sidewalk. And there's planting some trees like in Brooklyn, right? And so there's a tree that grows in Brooklyn. Sorry, bad joke. So anyway, you know, so as the tree grows, you know, the roots grow and it starts to like move these giant heavy slate pieces aside, and it might even crack part of the sidewalk. The tree doesn't hate the sidewalk. You know, the tree doesn't like, you know, effing slabs in my way. You know, it doesn't get pissed at the slate for being there. You know, it doesn't hate it. It's not, I'm going to crumble this thing till it's, you know, like into a million pieces. Like there's no aggression. It's just like saying, this is the space I need to live. Right. And so naturally you're going to come up against something else. Right. And so this is where the mind comes in, where, you know, at some point, like you just have to stop apologizing for being yourself. Right. Right. And I hate to say it, not all, in general. I'm going to say this because it's based on like, you know, 24 years of listening closely to people. In general, more often than not, I'm not making an absolute conclusionary statement, but in general, more often than not, my female patients spend a lot of time apologizing. And I think that they get a lot of feedback early on in life about what it means to take up your space. You know, I mean, there's a reason why, you know, like the character Wonder Woman is so cool, because she's not walking around like, you know, I love that scene where like played by Gal Gadot, you know, she goes to England, you know, with Chris Pine's character, and and she's walking around, you know, in this fancy dress with a sword, right? I mean, it's just, you know, she's, you know, I mean, in the other female character is like, oh, I like this one, you know, she's like, yeah, she's not afraid to take up her space, right? And I'm not saying we need to like walk around town with a sword on our back, you know, physically or metaphorically, but, you know, we do need to eventually kind of stand upright. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that, and I mean that literally as well as figuratively. Like when you walk down the street, you like see what it's like to just walk up straight. You're not out there going like, I'm gonna kick butt, I'm the best ever. It's not about that. It doesn't have to be haughty, right? But you just have to like stand in yourself, you know, and see what that's like and see how people respond, because you're going to have to retrain all the people around you, because we've trained them to, you know, relate to us in a certain way. So it's going to be uncomfortable for them as you step into your new authority. Right? There's going to be conflict, right? So, and again, wood shows up in so many ways. There is the shrinking violet flower. I mean, there are, but look at the blade of grass, right? That's so yielding, right? It's not a pine tree, right? Thank God, because that would be painful to walk on, right? But think about the grass. Like it's super bendable. It's very flexible. It's easily trampled, but not easily killed, right? So it bends, but it's tough, right? It's very fibrous, right? So yielding doesn't mean weakness. And this is the other area where in the mind of the gallbladder CF, things go awry, where they feel like flexibility and being yielding, which is facilitated by the juiciness of the blood that comes from the liver, allows us to be flexible, right? If you look at all the best leaders, they're the ones that are willing to take advice. They're willing to listen to experts. They're willing to bend and yield because they're connected to their inner wisdom, which is connected to their liver, which is, connected to their heart, right? If the gallbladder is more about its ego, then every decision is going to be the best decision ever. Just ask anybody. It's the best. It's always the best. It's the greatest, right? I've heard people tell me it's the best. They're like, wow. They come up to me and say, how come you're so great, right? So, when it's detached, it's only attached to its own ego, we get chaos, right? We get poor decision-making. We get poor judgment, right? Because some people are addicted to they think that if they think it, if it's their decision, then it's got to be the best decision and the right decision, and they're not willing to bend and be flexible and consider other perspectives. Because again, we can't see 360 degrees all the time. We need other people to see things we don't see, right? And this would be like relying on experts. Like, oh, you know what? I don't know about this topic. I don't know about, what's going on, say, in Libya. So I need an expert who's got eyes on Libya to tell me about what's going on with Libya, right? Or some other aspect. Like I didn't grow up learning economics. So if I go to a financial planner because they've got their eyes on that world and they can inform me, they can give me perspective, and then I can make a wise decision, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, people who are very successful in life are going to think that they know everything. And this is where the gallbladder sends them down the garden path, as it were. So just a bit about courage. The courage of gallbladder is not like kidney courage. The courage of kidney allows us to sit in the midst of great threat and fear without freaking out. Gallbladder courage is more likened to the tiger who knows when to pounce, right? The gallbladder courage is more about having a good self-image, right? A good self-image of yourself. Not like you're perfect, not like you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's about the willingness to assert your perspective, to speak up in that meeting, to write that email that needs to be written, to communicate, to call people to accountability and fairness, right? That's what wood has a lot to do with, equanimity and fairness, right? So
Sorry, do you mind to repeat the courage of the kidney again?
yes, so the courage of the kidney allows us to be in the presence of threat or fear, but still be still and present without freaking out, without becoming paralyzed, or without, that's the fright, right? Or the fight, or freaking out and running around, right? And panicking. So, water can either freeze or it can run wild, right? And so kidney courage allows us to be in the presence of what scares us, what's fearful, what's potentially threatening, without becoming paralyzed and without freaking out and running around like a chicken with its head cut off, right? So the gallbladder is not really about cowardice. The gallbladder is more about the courage that comes with the ability to kind of like show up, to assert yourself, to have a good self-image, right? It's about being forthcoming, right? Again, being on that high place speaking, to be able to share your feelings, to share your opinions, to share your emotions, to share what's going on, right? What you see. That's more about that courage. Like when you hang out your quote unquote shingle, you know, as an acupuncturist, you graduate and you hang up your shingle, that's gallbladder courage. You're making an announcement to the world that you're open for business, right? So the gallbladder allows us to navigate perceived obstacles by its capacity for external vision, as well as a larger perspective that's rooted in our understanding of the unity, which is held by the liver and the heart, right? We have two eyes, right? We have two ears, right? We've got two nostrils, we've got one mouth, right? And again, when someone is not sincere, right? If we suspect someone is not being forthcoming, what do we say? We're saying they're speaking out of two sides of their mouth, right? They're saying this to that person and they're saying this other thing to that person, right? So they're creating separation. So we naturally live and experience life through duality. The question is, can what comes out of our mouth or what we express through painting, art, sculpture, acupuncture, mothering, you know, whatever creative endeavor I mean, you know, what could be more creative than being yourself or raising a child? I mean, that's the most creative thing ever, right? You know, can you bring what you see and hear and taste and smell and bring it back into a state of oneness and express oneness? So are you creating unity or are you creating separation and conflict? Always look at what people leave in their wake behind them. Do they create chaos? Do they create confusion? Do they create separation? Or do they create unity? That's how you measure a leader. You know, what does one foster? Right? What does one give birth to? What is about giving birth and creating something? So are you creating something that creates a lot of conflict? Now, there's good conflict and bad conflict. There's good conflict that calls people to a higher perspective. Hey, you know, in our original Constitution, African Americans were considered 3/5 of a person, right? So at some point, someone said, you know what? I'm going to create some conflict by disagreeing with that. And I am actually going to actively speak out and express myself against that, right? If I say, hey, you know, the way student loans are dispersed at MUIH, and I'm not basing this on a real thing. I'm just using an example. Okay, so this is not based on something real. So don't think this is like, let's say we, you know, like I'm going to give more financial aid money to people who are taller because I don't like short people. You know, they irritate me. They're clearly deficient in some way. Right? So, you know, if you're over 5'10", I'm going to give you more financial aid money. Well, someone's going to say, you know what? I disagree with that. That's unfair. That creates separation, right? So you may have to stir things up. You may have to bring up an uncomfortable situation. You may have to fight for a higher perspective, right? I mean, I just think about, you know, I've been to the mountaintop. You know, he didn't say I've been to the deep valley. I mean, it was like, I've been to a place that affords me greater perspective. Like I've reached this goal, I've reached this summit, right? And I've looked down and I have a better view of things again, right? Does this make sense? So, I mean, that's just one analogy and I'm only speaking to it because it's just so prevalent in, you know, current events right now. You know, people are saying, you know, we want fair treatment and, you know, the gallbladder and the liver give us the capacity to kind of like stir things up, but in a good way towards a goal that actually creates more unity and more fairness and equanimity. But that can be messy. It can create conflict. So how do you dance with that conflict? The gallbladder actually helps us to dance with the conflict by being flexible, but not too flexible. But you know, you have to like stand and be rooted in your principles. So you're not gonna like give those up. You're not gonna lose your roots, right? Which are your principles, your virtues, right? So you're taking a stand for something, right? Like bamboo, right? It's firmly rooted. It will give and sway. Like, okay, I'm willing to compromise a little bit, but not not my root values and principles. But it also, you know, it spreads out. It takes up space. It's going to say, you know what? This is the space I need to exist, and this is what's fair, right? It's not about bullying and taking up more space than we need. It's not about like tit for tat. It's not about zero-sum game. My win is your loss. Your win is my loss, right? So the mind of the gallbladder allows us to navigate all of these details about how to create conflict in a way that works towards unity. And is strategic about it. It gets the strategy from the liver and then carries out that strategy, right? The liver says, you know, we should create a protest or some kind of march, and we should go here. Oh yeah, right? Like we should do it at this time of the day, and we should invite these people, and we should go to Facebook, announce it on Facebook and announce it on Twitter, and here's how we craft the message. That's all under, like, how to enact the plan. That's all under the gallbladder's purview. Okay? And the gallbladder allows us to deal with changing circumstances, right? Today it's raining. Now what do? How do we deal with how do we put on our protest? Oh, there's going to be, you know, this police presence. So how do we navigate that, right? Do we immediately run up to them and throw rocks at them? Right? You know, so the gallbladder helps us to navigate all of this. And so it affords us a sense of discrimination, discernment, and judgment. Not only right from wrong, but in terms of quality. Like, this is the best. So according to our ideals, this is the best way to protest. According to our ideals, this is the best way to get legislation passed to right this wrong, right? We got to like talk to these senators and these representatives. We have to involve these groups and that group, but not those groups, right? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
All right. And then the spirit of the liver, gallbladder, is about what empowers our virtues of boldness and decisiveness, you know, and the capacity to take in all the perspectives and merge that within to make decisions that serve the highest good. And again, the mind works towards that, right? So it enables us to perceive life experience as opportunities to grow rather than as obstacles to avoid or oppose. And this is tough. This takes some real high-mindedness. This takes some real high-spiritedness, because the gallbladder and the liver allow us, through the capacity of blood, to take the blows of life with comfort and grace. Now, this does not mean put up with abuse, but this does mean put up with some temporary abuse and punishment in order to achieve our goals. So think about people who were imprisoned for protesting some wrong, some injustice, right? You protest, you get thrown in jail overnight. Like, I'm sorry, does somebody have a question or comment? Right? So, right now, then do you, or somebody is like in your way, like you're in an organization and you want to put forth some initiative, and then somebody else rises up to oppose that. Like, do you then, like, how then do you dance with that? The spirit of the gallbladder allows us to see things from other people's perspective and to take that into account. That doesn't necessarily mean promote it or agree with it. It just means you get to know it, right? It's like walking in someone else's shoes. You get a chance to see their perspective, right? And a lot of people who may not understand things that you have to deal with may not understand your life experience, right? I don't know what it means to go through life as a woman. So I have a sense of understanding because I can listen very closely to women who tell me about their situation, or, you know, somebody, even a man who's like in another situation that I don't have experience with, right? Who's going through some kind of turmoil or upset. Like I have to really I have to do everything I can to get a sense of where are they coming from? How are they seeing the world? What's their perspective? And that takes patience, right? So we can't immediately launch into conflict and opposition. I'm not saying that you can't oppose it in your heart, right? Like you may not agree with the police. You may not agree with the senators or representatives that represent you. You may not agree with me as a faculty or an instructor, right? And I may not agree with you and your opinions, but like, do I have the capacity to bend and be flexible enough to put down my own ego enough to entertain, listening, and seeing things from your perspective so I can get a sense of what is the best way to move forward for everyone, right? And then we pounce, then we make a decision, then we boldly go forward, right? And then we deal with what comes up with next. So this brings us up to the other aspect of the spirit of the wood, and then we'll take a break, is the liver and gallbladder officials, like people who resonate with them, tend to take everything really personally. Like, it's not like that this happened to me. Like, you're driving down the road, someone doesn't use their blinkers, or maybe they don't see you and they veer into your lane and they cut you off, and you honk your horn to alert them that they're coming into your lane. Like, did they do that to you, or did they just do that, right? Like, and that tells you about like your condition of your blood, right? The more upset you are about that, like the more blood deficient you are, right? Because, and maybe they did do it to you. You don't know because you're not in communication with this person. So you don't know, like, you know, I'm driving down the road in my Prius. Maybe they got this thing about Prius. Maybe they've got me concluded that, like, you know, I'm an East Coast, you know, middle-aged white elitist, you know, liberal elitist, right? You know, like maybe they've got me all concluded. I don't know. Like, oh yeah, you know, I knew somebody with a Prius once and they were a jerk. Right? So now every time they see a Prius, they're gonna like cut them off. Like, so maybe it was sort of like at me, but they don't know me. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, there's Time Gelati. I know him really well. I'm going to cut him off. Like, I hated his lecture on the gallbladder. He just went on and on. Right? Cut him off the next time I see him. Right? So, you know, and maybe it is directed to you personally, right? But it's certainly going to feel personal, right? Because, and again, it's because people generally have us concluded into these generalized stereotypes and representations, because oftentimes when people see you, they're not seeing you. They see what you represent to them based on their past experiences. Maybe they have you concluded because you're a female. Maybe they have you concluded because of your height or the color of your skin or the type of clothes you wear or the way you talk, right? Or your makeup, or whether you have glasses or not, you know, or whether you have an accent, right? You know, like I remember seeing this T-shirt. It was meant to be in jest. Like there was this company selling T-shirts that said, "Stereotypes are a real time saver," right? Because it's like we think we know, but we don't know, right? And then so you say things and you act and you express yourself in ways that are really unwise, that show poor judgment, right? Because you're uninformed, right? And so you have to look at how personally do you take your, you know, things that happen to you. Wood CFs are going to take life circumstances as really personally, like, oh, I applied for this trademark and they declined it. Oh, I guess it's not meant to be, right? No, not necessarily. But there's also like, you know, are you going to fight this until your last dying breath because I'm right, right? You know, that's all from the ego. You have to connect to the spirit, which lives in, like, emerges from the Shen of your heart, which speaks to the Shen Hun of the liver. And then that communicates to the gallbladder about, like, when is enough enough, right? When is enough enough? Like when you're working out, how do you know when to stop? It's the gallbladder working with the liver connected to the heart that tells you, like, yeah, that's enough. No, I want to get bulky. You know, like you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to be just, you know, you're going to injure yourself. Right. I mean, so like, and you don't want to do too little because you want to challenge yourself. right? You need this uncomfortable challenge to grow, right? I mean, you know, working out, exercising is the perfect example. And wood CFs will work out not to the point of muscle fatigue, but sinew fatigue. I mean, they want to feel it in their joints. Like wood CFs like to work out that frustration. They can't just tire out their muscles. They got to tire out their sinews. I mean, they're going to work until they're ready to drop, right? Or on the flip side, like they just don't want to have anything to do with that sweating stuff. That's just now. Okay. All right. So that's the gallbladder in a nutshell. I'm sorry the nutshell lasted about a half an hour longer than I wanted it to, but there we are. So let's take a break until about 10 after. And if you have any questions, I'll stay on to answer them. Okay, so continuing on with gallbladder 44, foothold yin. Doesn't have to be entirely painful when done right. And I just want to remind you that when you read in Deadman and other books, and it tells you about the actions, which are like, you know, clearing heat, benefiting the head, benefiting the chest and the lateral costal region, calms the spirit. These are all based on patterns of disharmony. And these are all based on things that the gallbladder official in particular is susceptible to, including things that the channel is susceptible to, right? So this is a Jingwell point. It is a metal point, right? So, you know, it's really good for opposite end of the channel type stuff, things affecting the opposite end of the channel. And as a Jingwell point, it's very good for expelling, harassing, excess type exterior pathogenic factors, right? So, you know, not just damp and heat, but also wind and cold, any kind of external pathogenic factor that might be harassing this person who might resonate with the wood or not with the wood, but, and they might experience issues in the channel, right? So that could be some kind of traumatic injury, like you sprain your ankle and you feel the pain at that sort of anterolateral aspect of the malleolus, right? Where the gallbladder channel goes through, like gallbladder 40 and such. So this is also really good for clearing. Again, what does the gallbladder work with well? Works with heat, wind heat. So this is really great point to expel wind heat that's harassing the head. And how's that show up? Dry eyes, red eyes, itchy eyes, a feeling of fullness, sudden, right? Wind, sudden experiences of pain or harassment of the head, migraines, ocular migraines, people with a visual disturbance with the migraines. Oh, you know, I'm getting that shimmering sensation in my eyes. I know I'm getting a migraine coming up. I got to pop an Imitrex, right? Or bleed gallbladder 44, right? So it's said to benefit the chest and the lateral costal region. Well, that's very different than the head. Why would that be? Because, you know, it's a foo, so it's not like the entry or exit points are on the chest. So what's up with that, right? So again, as a wood meridian, and the gallbladder in particularly, like zigs and zags, it does traverse a lot of area around the torso, especially the sides of the torso, like the flanks. And so one of the things that tends to, we say, like, not damage, but not harass. I can't think of the word in English, but like, you know, one of the things that like the liver and the gallbladder are susceptible to is like, because the gallbladder and the liver, like the wood wants to move, it wants to express itself, it wants to take up its space, right? It's gotta be me, right? Like this Gary Larson Far Side cartoon, you know, there's this like, it's like this cartoon scene of like all these penguins, like hundreds of penguins on this giant ice floe. And there's this one, interestingly enough, like standing on this little like mound on the ice floe, and the penguin looks like every other single penguin is going, I gotta be me, right? I love that. That's such a gallbladder liver statement, right? Like, you know, they all look exactly the same, but they're not the same, because if you have the gallbladder discernment, right, and discrimination, you can see the subtle differences, right? This penguin's just a little taller, this penguin's just a little more plump, this person's fur is like, this penguin's fur is just a little bit different here or there, right? but the wood wants to express itself. The wood needs to move. So anything that interferes with the smooth flow of qi is going to impact the gallbladder and liver especially. And so what's the greatest obstacle to the smooth flow of qi? A tight diaphragm, right?
Tight.
So where's the diaphragm located? In the middle jowl. It's the border between the middle and upper jowl, right? So if they're annoyed and they're not expressing themselves, right? And they're not able to like vent, right?
Time.
1 second.
Pardon me.
Yeah, 1 second. So if they're not able to vent, then the diaphragm gets tight and that stagnates the qi in the middle jowl. And that's why you eventually have like tightness in the chest, hard to breathe, tightness in the lateral costal regions, right? Not a lot of flexibility, hard to twist, hard to breathe, hard to relax. Yes, question, comment. Yes. Was that you,
Sorry,
Nydia?
time. So you said the tight diaphragm is the first thing that shows the not smooth flow of qi.
Well, it
This is
doesn't have to be the
thing?
first thing. It doesn't have to be the first thing, but it is a thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the qi could get stagnant in the head, right? Maybe you eat a lot of like damp, hot foods, and that starts to obtund the head. And that makes your allergies worse. That makes you clogs up your ears. Your eyes get dry and red and itchy. There's like, maybe you're susceptible to like, you're outdoors a lot. So you're susceptible to a lot of pollen, right? And that wind, and it has like a hot nature, right? Harasses your eyes. So you get like dry, red, itchy eyes, like from an allergic response. So this is like a good point for that. Yeah. Someone else? I thought there was someone else.
Yes. I was saying before you go into the points, I just was asking you to explain what this means. I just typed it in chat before you go into each individual point. What does that mean?
What does what mean?
The question in the chat box. It's on your document. It's on page 1 of the document we're doing now. Gallbladder is the only yang channel to wrap around the genitals. What does that mean? That's what I'm trying to ask.
I'm sorry. So, and the liver to some degree as well. So it's actually the liver and the gallbladder, but it's the only yang channel. So what it means is the meridian through its deep pathways actually like encircles the genital region. It goes through the area of the vagina and the penis. And
Okay, thank you.
the uterus. Yeah, so quite literally. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, all right, so gallbladder 44, Jingwell, metal point, helps to expel harassing pathogenic factors, heat, wind, also cold. But again, what aggravates the liver and the gallbladder the most is like heat and damp heat, right? So it also affects the opposite end of the channel, which is the head. So it calms the shen because it helps to relax us by relaxing the sinews, by moving and coursing the qi, right? It's like, I don't know, God, I'm debating whether or not to use this example. Probably better not. All right, so, but let's say like you've got a lot of pent up frustrations and then you're finally able to like maybe work out or get this, like, you've had this goal and you're trying to get it accomplished and you've like gone at it, and you finally reach your goal. Like, it's like, oh, now I can relax, right? Like that, it's like, or you work out, you're really frustrated, you're having a hard day and you like move that qi, you sweat a little bit, like you tire yourself out, you get a lot of like qi circulation, blood circulation, that helps you to relax, right? So that's what it means by calm the spirit. It's by virtue of moving and coursing the qi in the blood through the flesh, through the sinews, through the diaphragm, right? And so that's why this is really good for like irregular menstruation, contracted sinews, right? Because wind stimulates things to contract as well as cold. You know, headaches, sudden headaches, headaches with agitation. Think about migraines, stabbing pain in the head, right? This is like a powerful chi mover and pathogenic factor expeller. So really good for that. Okay. On a mental emotional level, this is really good to help people connect to their highest principles and values that make their life something sacred, that make their life something reverential, that make their life something special, right? Because if you keep compromising your values, if you keep eroding your principles, like, you know, by any means necessary, right? So like, maybe, you know, like we all watch these shows where politicians sort of like, they make these compromises where they're willing to do something a little bit bad in order to get something good, right? And so again, that's a fictional show, but like to some point you may be faced with a decision where you violate your own nature. Maybe like, I know I shouldn't eat this, but I'm going to eat it because it tastes so good and I deserve it, damn it, because I've had a hard day, right? So I'm going to drink that half a bottle of wine every single day, right? So eventually that comes at some kind of cost. It erodes us. It erodes our integrity. It erodes our hun. It erodes our judgment over time, right? Because bad judgment becomes infectious. It becomes habitual. So this helps to wake us up to what's really important to us and take a stand in that, not a position, taking a stand in what's most important to us. Like, you know, you're really lonely, you know, you've been without a partner for a long time. And so maybe your standard's lower. Maybe you had too high standards. Maybe the metal within really needed some sedating. You know, like no one measures up, right? Like, nope, they're just not good enough, right? Because that's covering up for like an unwillingness to maybe like, you know, be in potential conflict with someone else. Like, yeah, it's too much trouble, right? They're all, men are just a pain in the ass. Like, forget it, right? So like maybe, you know, your standards are too high. Maybe they're not high enough. So, you know, these things erode our sense of judgment and discernment over time. So this helps us to remind us of, you know, what our values really are, and kind of like brings that up to the fore, and also to dispel anything that gets in the way, like fears, egoic attachments, right? Like, oh, I could, you know, like when I mean, to be honest, like when I met my wife, I mean, she's like this, you know, California blonde kind of hippie. And that really wasn't, you know, like when I thought of like my ideal person, like that's not the picture I had, you know what I mean? But when I got to know her, I was like, oh my God, this is like the perfect person for me, you know? So like, can you learn to like discern? Like, can you let go of all the crap? That's like the external pathogenic factor. That's like all this prior conditioning that no longer serves. Like they have to be this height. They have to look this way. They have to make this amount of money. I'm not saying you can't have those things. You can have them as preferences, but if they interfere with like, with what you know to be right, then it's an issue, right? Now it's your ego, right? So this helps us to like move beyond that and expel any like shei-chi thoughts and beliefs that interfere with us expressing ourselves authentically, with like following our Tao authentically, right? You know, maybe you're violating your family tradition by going into acupuncture and they were all lawyers. And how come you know, how can you discern, how can you shame the family by going into acupuncture, you know, or whatever. So this is like, you're taking a stand for what's most valuable and important to you. All right, so gallbladder 43, Valiant stream, really phenomenal point, Ying Spring point, water point. In Deadman, they call it clamped stream. So obviously by the Deadman's name, it tells you that this is really good for moving stagnation of the fluids, right? So the fluids, including the blood, are what cool us, nourish us, settle us, right? So the gallbladder, we know, along with the liver, is very susceptible to dealing with heat, damp heat, stagnation, right? And this is, you know, really good for Clearing heat, benefiting the head, benefiting the ears, benefiting the eyes. Like half the points you read on the command level for gallbladder are going to be the same thing. Clears heat, benefits the eyes, benefits the ears, benefits the head, right? So why is that? It like helps clear damp heat and wind heat and heat that's obstructing the sense organs of the head, and also the yang qi, clear, like interfering with the clear yang rising to the head that brings the turbid back down, right? So this is also good for clearing damp heat from the channel, just like about every other point on the gallbladder. So what's the discernment? So these are things that have a lot to do with, they're a little bit more chronic than what you might deal with a Jingwell point. I also look at it as Valiant stream. So this is not so much about like the cooling aspects of the metal, but the very cooling aspects and the flowy aspects go with the flow aspects that are resonant with the water, right? To go with the flow, right? To the juiciness that provides this capacity to be flexible, right? You have to be, right? Like you can't be dry and brittle, right? Again, gallbladder 44 is getting rid of that dryness and heat that makes one so brittle. And that's like the metal can get really hard and brittle within us. We can become too judgmental, too harsh, right? Water then brings in even more fluidity and compassion and wisdom, right? This is also good for autoimmune patients with joint problems, right? You know, water deals with like the synovial fluids, okay? So a lot of tightness in the joints, right? We want more fluidity, more flexibility, both in mind and in body. And this also takes a certain amount of flexibility, which also takes a certain amount of courage. It takes courage to be flexible. Again, not lack of fear courage, but like the courage to restrain yourself. And again, clamped stream is someone too restrained. Is there so much fear? Is there so much paralysis that the stream of chi flow has become clamped down, right? By our own fears, our own anxieties, right? So this is a really nice point to help move that. Gallbladder 42, Earth 5 meetings. Really nice point. It's not very done commonly. It's sort of like one of these poor, neglected in-between points. I've come to use it predominantly as an alternative shoe stream point. While it is the third point on the channel, right, 44, 43, 42, which generally the shoe stream point is the third point from the extremities, right? Like, you know, you've got heart 7, right? Heart 9, 8, 7, so shoe stream point. Liver 3, shoe stream point. And it is actually at the level of roughly at the level of liver 3. But it's not an element point. Gallbladder 41, the wood point, is actually the third elemental point or third antique point. So that's historically and classically more commonly used as the shoestring point. But I found this to be very useful. Sure, I yawn when I'm hungry. I found this to be very useful to combine with gallbladder 41 as sort of an alternative shoestring point in a lot of musculoskeletal problems. There's a very common combination. I don't know what you call it. I've called it, I've applied the verb harmonize to what this does, which is like, let's say I have ankle pain on my right ankle that is predominantly damaged the gallbladder channel area of my ankle, like the anterolateral aspect of the ankle, right? Maybe even both, the whole lateral ankle where I'm dealing with gallbladder and bladder. So what I would do is let's say it's on my right ankle, I would treat the shoestring point of the meridian that traverses the area of pain or damage. I would do the shoestring point on that side, on that meridian, combined with its 6th division paired shoestring point. So for example, if I injured my right ankle, I would do, and it traverses the area of pain or bruising or sprain, the gallbladder channel goes through that, I would do gallbladder 41 shoestring point on the right, the same side as the pain, as well as triple heater 3, right? Triple heater is the Xiaoyang complement on the opposite side, shoestring point. But I could also do the third point, which is gallbladder 42. And I found this to be very effective. And what this does is the shoestring point now the width and breadth and depth of the meridian has grown to allow for more flow, right? It can carry more toxins through the channel and away from the area. In this case, toxins would be broken blood vessels, the stuff that comes from the broken blood vessels, the intracellular fluids that spill out from the broken cells of the area, right? So you've got these fluids, you've got bits of like intracellular matter, intravascular matter, right? And so that's what creates the swelling, right? The fluids of the blood and intracellular fluids. So that I do this point predominantly for its effect as an alternate source point, true stream point in musculoskeletal problems. It has all the same, or many of the same actions as gallbladder 41 and 43. But this one, it actually says more about, it emphasizes spreading the liver chi. And I think it's because it's the third point on the channel, and it is level with liver 3, so it's in the neighborhood, and points in the same neighborhood generally do the same things, or same types of things, have the same nature. So this is a great point where people have a lot of stagnation in the gallbladder channel, or in the gallbladder aspects of their mind, right? So maybe they're overly discriminatory, they're overly prejudiced. And, you know, that can show up in terms of their attitudes towards people, as well as their attitudes towards anything, towards animals, pets, foods, whatever. I mean, they might have like these very strong opinions that create a lot of upset in their life and create a lot of self-created obstacles in their life. A lot of times we don't, what's that it's saying? A lot of opportunities are missed because they come disguised in wearing overalls as hard work. Right? So, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard that saying. I'm butchering it a little bit, but I think that that's really good. Like, it doesn't fit our picture, right? Because we have these discriminations and prejudices, right? My grandfather used to have this thing about people from West Virginia. It's a long story, but he did. He just like hated people from West Virginia. And so, and Pennsylvania, like he hated Pennsylvania. And so like he, you know, there was a time he could have had like the Rolling Rock distributorship for like Central PA, and he didn't, and he blew it off. He didn't even entertain it because, like, you know, he didn't like people from Pennsylvania. So it's a long story. I don't want to go into it, but so, you know, I mean, can you imagine what that would have been worth, the first distributorship for Rolling Rock beer? And I mean, I'd be driving a Maserati right now. So, right. So this is really good for people who, like, you know, they're tight, they're kind of tight, they're a little uptight, you know, in their opinions and judgments, as well as, you know, its use in musculoskeletal problems. All right. So, and it is called Earth 5 meeting. So it has a lot to do with, like, you know, the Earth is what holds the center, right? You've got the 4 directions going off in all of the 4 directions. But the Earth holds the center, and it is centrally located on the dorsum of the foot, you know, on the lateral aspect of it a little bit. But so this is also about people like who need some kind of consolidation. You know, if you think about stagnation, that's like over consolidation. Things are being held too tightly. Things are brought into the center too much. So, you know, like this helps them loosen up. But also people who are like really disorganized and could use a little more consolidation in their mind. Because they're going in this direction, then that direction, then this direction, and that direction. You're going towards this goal, then that goal. I often combine this with gallbladder 34, the earth point, to help them kind of consolidate. And if you think about the herbs that are all like affecting the liver and the gallbladder, what's the flavor? Astringent, right? Their nature is astringent. They're sour, excuse me, the flavor is sour, and its action is astringent. So the earth, right, like sawdust absorbs oil, right? You know, paper towels absorb fluids, right? The sponge draws fluids in, right? So this is like, some people need, there's a lot of like inner unrest. So they need kind of like astringing. They need to be like kind of brought back to center, to be more grounded, so things aren't flying up into the head, literally, or like their ideas, or like kind of like disorienting them like wind, right? So people need to be a little bit more like grounded. Gabish? All right.
Yeah.
We'll do a few more and then we'll take a very short break. You guys hanging in there? I know it's long. So gallbladder 41, foot governor of tears, also known as foot above tears, which is sort of mimicking, you know, above, below, below, above. Gallbladder 15, head above tears, or head governor of tears. I actually heard this point described once as frustrated to the point of tears on the foot.
Huh.
Right? So, you know, like, have you ever been like so frustrated and pissed off that you like, start to almost cry? Right? So it has a lot to do with that, which is really a lot of stagnation and tension, right? Like a frustration. But also, if you think about, like, again, what harasses, what interferes or taxes the wood more than anything, wind and heat, right? So wind, what's most susceptible to the wind? Not your feet, not your knees, your head, right? So what's the one sense organ that needs a lot of moisture, right? Your eyes. I mean, that's why we blink. I mean, we blink to re-moisten our eyes. How often do we have to do that? A long time. I mean, very frequently, right? Like staring contest, right? Ready, go, right? What happens? Your eyes eventually dry out, right? We have to keep, right? I mean, we need the squeegee, you know, for the windscreen of our eyes pretty frequently, right? So like, it's not just heat that dries things out. Think about like, you want to air something out to dry it out. You don't put it inside. You lay it outside. It might not even be exposed in the sun, but if anybody who's spent any time outdoors or has visited the Southwest, and like, you know, when it's windy, yeah, it's hot and dry, but the wind actually dries things out. The wind accelerates evaporation, right? And so this is lacrimation, eye watering from heat or dryness of the eyes, right? This liver yang rising, gallbladder yang rising dries out the eyes. So this is good for when somebody's experiencing physically, they're outdoors, they're exposed, they're dealing with a lot of wind. Anybody who's ever like spent any time on a ship or a boat? Any sailors? Coast Guard? Right? People who just like go yachting, right? You know, when you're, I mean, you know, if you're not anchored out, if you're on a boat, you're moving, and that wind, right, dries you out. I mean, you can always tell like people, they spend a lot of time at sea, like their eyes are dry, their skin's very dry, right? They're more prone to wrinkles, right? Eventually the collagen in the skin dries out, right? So this is for people who are really dry in the eyes and head and face, but also for people who on the excessive side are producing too much lacrimation, you know, watery eyes, right? Leakage of tears, right? Does this make sense? All right. So also as a wood point and a shoestring point, this is great for dealing with, you know, the wood energy that gets really bound up. So, and things get gnarly, like a gnarly knotted tree, right? So the joints get knotted, right? Like people's brows furrow because of all the headaches, maybe one-sided headaches. Again, wind stirs up, heat stirs up wind. A sign of wind is dizziness, right? Floaters or dry eyes, like it's a blood deficiency thing, like you get floaters in your eyes, that's blood deficiency, and an imbalance in the fluids in the eye, sudden headaches, migraines, dizziness. Again, also that fullness in the chest, things are stagnating in the diaphragm. So wood helps to spread things, right? So chest pressure, chest pain, if the liver stagnates in the chest, you know, then it's going to hinder also the descent of lung qi, right? So people can't take a full deep breath, or people are sighing a lot, right? Because that's that unconscious attempt to try and move that lung chi through the chest. And so that tight diaphragm can prevent smooth respiration. And so the sighing, that also, like that tight chest can also interfere with the pericardium, right? The Julian pair of the liver. So there might be some, emotional agitation, right? I mean, think about PMS, right? Not only is the blood concentrating energetically in the area of the uterus and the ovaries to prepare for a potential birth, or to prepare for potential conception, excuse me, and which need, this fertilized egg would need lots of nourishment, and this fetus would need nourishment. So there's a concentration of blood that's readying itself at the disposal. It's like, okay, you're taking stuff out of the pantry and you're putting it on the counter to prepare to feed, a guest who might arrive, might not arrive, right? Every month, does the guest show up? Do I have to feed this guest? Or do they not show up, right? Right? But I'm preparing, I'm getting all of the, ingredients assembled to, feed my mystery guest, right? Surprise, not surprise, right? So there's a concentration of blood and chi in an area anyway, right? So that's creating a concentration. And then what does blood do? It houses the shen. So it's concentrating the shen, right? And then so subsequently, there's like an intensity of emotion, right? Because the shen gives us the capacity for the emotions, and blood circulates the emotions. So if their blood is not circulating as much, it's being more concentrated and condensed, right? As well as a tight diaphragm, which is condensing things in the chest, which condenses and concentrates the chi and the blood in the pericardium. You've got this more intense, volatile emotions, right? That like leak out. And again, what happens? It explodes like wind. So you get these sudden reactions. Sudden, again, the wood like stands on the high ground speaking, right? So you may react verbally, you may react physically, you may react emotionally, right? That's why, so like once the flow starts, it's like, right? Now there may be cramping. I mean, I'm talking about the ideal now, right? Like the cramping is awful, right? And there may be clotting, but again, that's like more stagnation. But if everything is as nature intended, the flow starts, what happens? You feel relief, right? Now there's flow. Oh, okay. So gallbladder 41 is a really good point for dealing with a lot of like PMS type stressful tension, a tight, frustrations, mental frustrations, spirit level frustrations, that, tighten the diaphragm, that then generate heat, which make us more reactive, which makes us more like hot under the collar, right? Emotional. And you watching yourself reacting, why did I react that way? I had no control of it, because you can't control it, right? You can't keep that bud from blooming just by force of will. You can't squeeze that hard. You can't put a lid on your own mind. So what do you have to do? You have to course the chi. Liver gallbladder chi cannot be reasoned with. Like when you're really pissed, when you're really upset, when you're really frustrated, like you don't want, oh, they're there, it'll be okay. Just, think positively. You want to punch them in the head when someone says that, right? Like, stop it, right? Like you want to do something. Like I want to go light a car on fire. You know what I mean? Like I want to throw a brick through a window. I mean, this is like chi that like can't be reasoned with. You're not going to go, well, logically, you should be reasonable. Like, F that. It's not, doesn't work that way. Liver gallbladder chi doesn't work that way. It just doesn't, right? You got to move it. You've got to come up with a plan. You've got to take action, right? That action might be do calisthenics. It might be, I'm going to say it, go have sex, in a responsible way, in a healthy way. Right? But this, I mean, that is the ultimate liver gallbladder chi smoother, right? Is to experience the sexual act to completion, right? right? That's what an orgasm does. It spreads the liver and gallbladder chi that's especially bound up around the genital region, right? Around the ovaries, the uterus, the vagina, the penis, the testicles, like the whole lower abdominal area, the whole lower two chakras, right? That's what an enjoyable, dare I say, successful, like, you know, like heart enriching experience outcome is for the sexual act. It spreads the smooth flow of liver chi. It allows the diaphragm to open and relax. And that's why people often smoke afterwards. It's like, oh, I can finally take that deep inhale, right? I get that extra hit of dopamine after like the other hit of dopamine that I just got, right? So, you know, I'm not trying to get too inappropriate, but this is, you know, we're human beings and this is a human experience. So that's a good example of like moving the gallbladder and liver chi. And so, you know, maybe they can't do that. So they throw eggs at a tree. They hit a cushion with a wiffle ball bat, and they put a press tack in gallbladder 41, and you have them do breathing exercises or go work out, right? So this is a great point. This is like, to me, like the ultimate frustrated. I'm so frustrated about whatever, whether it's reasonable or rational or not. This is like the best point. Like you just put like a press tack and then you like seal it with wax over top of it. All right. All right. So let's take like a 10-minute break till 11, and then we'll continue with gallbladder 40. So go stretch, do some yoga stretches. Let's talk about gallbladder 40. So gallbladder 40 is a very commonly done point, excuse me. It's the source point, right? It's a wilderness mound or mound of ruins. This is a point that I actually commonly do for a lot of hip pain. On a physical level, this is also very good for spreading the liver chi. It clears liver gallbladder damp heat. It clears damp heat out of the liver and gallbladder channels, especially the gallbladder channel. It's said to activate the channel and benefit the joint. So what does it mean by that? So for some reason, like points around the malleolus, like bladder 62, bladder 60, kidney 6, right? Even kidney 3 to some degree, you know, spleen 5, you know, a lot of points around the malleolus. I don't know, there's like some kind of momentum that's created. Like if any of you have ever gone like whitewater rafting, and as you approach a very large boulder in the stream, you know, they tell you to like aim for the boulder, because if you aim away, you might get caught in like a little eddy. But if you, as you approach that boulder creates turbulence, and it kind of like whips you around, right? So I don't know if you've ever gone whitewater rafting. Highly recommended, by the way. So I think it's similar to that. I think it's like there's some aspect of the way that the chi flows around this giant boulder of a malleolus that creates turbulence, and then the chi flows very quickly. So I think that speed generates momentum, and that momentum generates power. So this is often done for, you know, all the very same reasons of like all the other points. But this one also is really good. I found like as benefiting the hip pain, like bursitis, stagnation in the hips. And I think it's sort of like similar in, you know, morphology. You know, you've got this large head of the fibula, right, connecting into the base of the foot. And it's creating this mound, and it's sort of like the ball and socket, the ball of the socket of the hip. And I think that momentum carries the chi through the channel, through the joints. And I think that's why they say it benefits the joints and the sinews. So for hip pain on the same side, that's sort of in the area of the gallbladder, you have to be very careful, but you have to, like, you can needle this quite deeply into like up against the joint. And this moves the chi through the hip and the channel very powerfully. It's also good for, you know, like one-sided headaches and neck pain, cramping in the legs. You know, this is the source point, so it helps people connect to the yuan source chi. So this is a good point for people who are like so lost in the details that they kind of get like lost in themselves, right? They're like in the weeds, right? There's so many details to navigate. There's so many decisions that need to be made. Like, you know, like I used to be like anybody who's in the food service industry, you know, waiter, bartender, like they call it being in the weeds, where you're just like overwhelmed by like all these tables and all these orders to manage all these details and make all these decisions and navigate literal movement. So your patient may feel like that. They're in the weeds, and it's really frustrating them, and they can't really get a good perspective. Like, you know, they need to be able to kind of like get above it all and get some perspective, which might mean going to get some guidance from like a counselor or a psychotherapist, or talking to a subject matter expert, or going to their own best perspective, which is going within, getting, you know, slowing down. The gallbladder as a food can get kind of fast, get sped up. So going inside, connecting to your source, connecting to the power of your ancestors, right? You know, getting back to that original nature, to yourself, your highest self. So this is a great point for that. And again, this is about the point where I mentioned like, well, how do you decide which points to do? Well, again, you know, what elemental nature do you want to draw from? What elemental virtues do you want to draw from, right? What's the quality of the point? It's a source point, right? So what kind of chi does it deal with, right? And then also palpation. You know, palpation will tell you a lot. I can't tell you how many times I was kind of dead set on doing a certain point, but then I palpate it and it just doesn't feel right. I just don't feel connected to it. I'm not able to find it sometimes really well. And so I palpate other points, and oh yeah, that stimulates some inner sense, some sense of chi, maybe a ashi response from the patient, or they feel like something more is there, like there's more there. So highly recommend palpation in terms of using your gallbladder discernment and distinction. Right, so gallbladder 39, hanging cup or suspended bell, that's referring to the malleolus itself. Now, I know that Deadman finds this point posterior to the fibula. And I'm going to suggest to you that, so there's theoretical reality and clinical reality. Theoretical reality, great, it's posterior to the fibula, fantastic. Clinical reality, I get so much better results when I needle anterior to the fibula. Why, I don't know. And in fact, there's a point I often use for neck pain, which I call gallbladder 39.5. It's halfway between gallbladder 40 and 39. So again, remember, you're imaging, you can also image the head, neck, and torso onto the lower extremities, where the foot, in this case, I'm pointing to my hand, which is morphologically and anatomically similar to the foot. So this is like the head, the ankle or wrist is like the neck, right? This is like the upper jowl, like the calf or the shin. And then the knee would be the waist, okay? So, you know, gallbladder 40, 39, wow, no surprise, these are great for neck pain. Why? Because they image where the neck would be, right? You've got like the, you know, the base of the neck, and then the whole like cervical region, like along through here, right? So gallbladder 40, gallbladder 39 area, these are really good for neck issues. It's said to be good for the sinews and bones, and it says to benefit the neck, and I think that's why, right? Opposite end of the channel, but, you know, imaging this portion of the body onto the leg, right? It's also good to clear gallbladder heat and fire and activate the channel, alleviate pain, because again, it's, you know, it's moving the chi pretty good and strong, but it's also the inner, what do you call it? The influential point for marrow. And so the marrow is the stuff that makes up your nerve tissue, your spine, and your brain. So it's all the central nervous system tissue, right? And so interestingly enough, right, marrow helps to regulate the blood, and the you know, blood cells are formed in the marrow. But then the marrow-like substance, which is also includes the central nervous system and the brain, right? So this is really good for wind. Again, gallbladder is great for dispelling wind and wind heat. Wind harassing the brain, right? Dizziness, dealing with like Bell's palsy, recent strokes, recent TIAs, any like, you know, vertigo, right? Anything that's like any kind of wind that's harassing the head, the brain, the eyes, the mind. So anything, any kind of injury to the brain. And I mean, again, you know, we can only do so much, but it's really good for supporting the marrow, right? Supporting like clearing out like our thinking, right? Clearing phlegm from, and damp heat and phlegm from the head, right? So this is a really good point for that. And again, wind generates heat, so that what generates like, so that frustration, like that rising frustration, right? It can generate heat that can generate wind in of itself. So this is also good for cooling a patient down, again, based on palpation, right? So I do this a lot of time for people. I combine it with other gallbladder and liver points for people who are really tense and frustrated, but they also are experiencing like dizziness, vertigo, visual disturbances, maybe visual migraines or even regular migraines, seizure disorders, right? Marrow disorders, MS, right? Multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, things like that, or damage to like concussions, right? Things like that. Gallbladder 38. Gallbladder 38, yang support, also known as yang assistance. So this is the fire point and the Jing River point. Clears gallbladder heat, harmonizes sha yang, benefits the sinews and channels, activates the channel, alleviates pain, blah, blah, blah. So it does all those things again. Again, this time more dealing with the heat aspect, right? And nourishing the fires of the gallbladder, like the fire within of one's passions that give the gallbladder its courage, its willingness to stand up, its willingness to you know, fight oppression, call people to accountability, right? To change things again, right? Wind on a psychological level is about change, right? So the gallbladder is a change agent. Livers are planners of change agents, right? You know, gallbladder carries out. Gallbladders like are the activists that like, you know, right the wrongs, that like, you know, like get things done, change what needs to be changed. It moves the stagnant. It, you know, dispels the status quo, right? So that needs a lot of passion, that needs a lot of support, but not too much, right? So it regulates our passions and our heat, so we don't get too overheated, too passionate, or too resigned, too depressed, too cold. We retreat from the call, right? We sit on the couch, right? So this is a nice point to help balance those two forces. I sometimes combine this with GV9, utmost yang, to kind of help either ease or relax, you know, because some people, they need to like slow down, enjoy the scenery, enjoy the ride. It's not just about getting there, right? And then, or also like to nourish the passion to help people to take action, right? There's a great book that came out 1 million years ago called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? If you're of a certain age, you probably had to read this in high school or college, right? Some hippie professor wanted you to read this, so like, you know, right? And so my hippie professor made me read this. And I remember just like this line, like early on, like this father and son go on this motorcycle trip. And he said, we were making good time with more emphasis on the good than the time. I like that. That sort of reminds me of this point, you know, because fire, heat moves fast, right? And so, you know, sometimes we need to like slow down a little bit, but sometimes we also need a little impetus to get off the couch. All right, so gallbladder 37, bright and clear. As a low junction point, especially on the Fu, a yang meridian, this has a lot to do with opening to the exterior. And the low junction points are also said to help circulate blood. Blood houses the Shen, so this has a lot to do with mood and emotions. Excuse me, I yawn when I'm hungry. So this helps to kind of vent stagnant emotions, to vent the frustration that comes with unexpressed emotions, right? You know, do somebody a favor, bleed this point, right? If they're a wood CF and their pulses aren't really deficient, and they feel like they've got a little bit of like chi there, and the pulse has some width and breadth and force to it, just try bleeding liver 5 junction and gallbladder 37 for people who tend to feel things a lot. Like some people just tend towards more emotionality. I would not say that wood CFs tend to be more emotional than any other CFs, but I'm saying some wood CFs are more emotional than others, just like heart CFs, some are more emotional than others. And I would say bleed this point, like maybe even like for women, like around mid-cycle, or there's this one patient that I treat who's not a wood CF. Well, I kind of suspect like wood is their first within, and that's sort of like the most dominant. And they hate it when I treat them on any kind of points on liver. They just get irritated. And I just thought that was pretty funny. So like that, maybe that's making my case. But like the week before, she said she's got like 2 days, and she's a licensed clinical social worker. It's like, so she's, she has some understanding of like psychology in the mind. And she's like the funniest, most peaceful person you'd ever want to meet. But she says like, there's like, she knows like that 2 days before her period comes, like she basically wants to like buy a machete and just like murder people, right? So not that she's going to do that, and she's making a joke out of it, and I've documented that she's making a joke out of it, but like literally she just like wants to strangle people, right? Including herself. Like sometimes like the first person she wants to strangle is herself. She just says, I just go insane. So I started bleeding this point like once a week, and it really took the pressure off, right? It vented out. If you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to watch the little videos I did on bleeding on my YouTube channel. But this is a great point to dispel stagnation that's affecting the shen, right? So they can see more brightly and more clearly, physically as well as spiritually and psychologically, right? This also helps a lot with like one-sided headaches, teeth grinding at night, frustrations that then affect the hun. And then the hun is agitated at night. There's a lot of teeth grinding at night, clenching their jaw, a lot of jaw clenching, and as they say in the Bible, rending of garments and gnashing of teeth. They're tearing up their own clothes, they're grinding their teeth. This is a great point for people like that. It also takes a lot of pressure and helps to actually, if you move that stagnation, that flow of blood actually helps the circulation of blood, which actually helps to nourish the sinews and the joints more. So you may say, well, they're already kind of dry and a little bit like there's a lot of blood stagnation, which is leading to some deficiency. I don't want to bleed because, I'm emptying the system, right? I'm lowering the reservoir. No, actually you move that stagnant blood, that blood comes out dark and thick, and then it starts to brighten up. Then you stop the bleeding, right? Again, just with a lancet, right? You're not using a scalpel, just a few drops. And then actually that enhances circulation, and people will feel a lot better, right? And it also helps the blood to circulate better, which then nourishes the sinews more, and people are then more flexible, okay? So this is also good for people like really hold on to one side of an issue. It's very like black or white. I'm right, you're wrong. They see things as a zero-sum game. Your win is my loss. There's no sense of win-win. So I often do this as well. It's again, brighten the eyes. It means not just brighten the eyes because you're clearing the heat that's in the blood level now that's really affecting the fluids of the eyes, not just the jin thin fluids, but the ye thick fluids. And the blood vessels that go to the eyes. So somebody actually may even have like a hard time seeing, and that that's blood supply to the retina. So this is actually like brightens the eyes physically by clearing the heat and the damp heat and the wind that's in the channels affecting the eyes and the head, making people dizzy, but also the sinews, tight, inflexible joints, right? A lot of damp heat coagulating in the sinews, but also psychologically, like alleviating that pressure of stagnation. All right, so stomach 36, outer mound, G-clef point as an accumulation point, especially on a fu, it helps to move chi stagnation and accumulation. It says it's really good for acute situations, but honestly, I think it's really good for chronic situations as well. And with chronic, then I would actually combine it with the outer bladder line point that relates to the gallbladder and the liver, and bleed those, right? You can bleed this point. You can also needle it. You can tonify or sedate. If pulses feel relatively deficient, then I would tonify. If they feel relatively excessive pounding, then I would sedate. For some reason, I'm not sure why, but in the Systematic Classic of Acupuncture and Moxibustion, it says this is also good for pain in the skin, right? So like skin bee, painful obstruction. So if you think about like heat and wind harassing the exterior, like drying things out, maybe it's like, gone into the blood level and now it's, accumulated. Maybe that's why it's good for that. Also with atrophy disorder. So again, heat can be damaging. Stagnation generates heat. Heat can generate wind. Wind and heat then damage the marrow. The marrow is like the central nervous system. So now you get like nerve damage, which nerves innervate the muscles. So you may get muscle atrophy, right? This is also with gallbladder 39. You can do it singularly or with gallbladder 39 for way atrophy syndrome, long-standing B obstruction syndrome that's led to blood deficiency. And then you've lost like drop foot, or you've lost power in your grip. Like carpal tunnel syndrome. You may look at people who've had carpal tunnel syndrome for a long period of time, like I did for a long period of time, and actually my thenar imminence shrunk, right? I used to have like a fairly muscular thenar eminence, and that became like really flat and flaccid, right? Similarly, like Achilles tendinopathy, you might get drop foot. You might get like, there's so much obstruction that like, the muscles, the flesh starts to deteriorate because it doesn't get the nourishment from the marrow and the chi and the blood, right? So this is really a sense of that, like accumulations and stagnations that have now affected the tonicity and strength and power of the muscles. All right, so gallbladder 35, I'm going to skip. I'm sorry, question?
Do you mind to repeat it? Stagnation leads to heat, heat leads to wind, and wind leads to...
Wind can stir heat. Wind can stir heat, and then also then that leads to deficiency. So that wind and possibly the heat then start to damage the tissue, and that leads to what's called way atrophy. That means that the tissues are not getting the nourishment of chi and blood that they need because of this obstruction and this toxic heat that's damaging the tissues. So if you think about like athletes, especially athletes who've competed in contact sports, right? Like when I met Johnny Unitas, who was this Colt, he was like, a god for people in Baltimore. He was a former quarterback for the Baltimore Colts. And he got to the point where he couldn't hold a cup of coffee in his hand because his hand was so weak because of all the damage he had received to his shoulders and also to like, his arm. He's a quarterback, so people are trying to hit him in the arm and the shoulder. They're driving into the turf, right? So he had dealt with so much like neck damage, like jarring hits that, then create this sort of whiplash effect that deteriorate the central, the sinews. And also you're playing in the cold and the wind, right? Football without a scarf. I mean, their necks are exposed, right? So all this and then the ice damaged, injuries. So, all this B obstruction generated stagnation, which led to heat, which led to damage of the tissues, which led to way atrophy, where you don't have like muscle power and strength, and because of the nerve damage, and that's the marrow, damage to the marrow. All right, so gallbladder 34. So this is a really important point, and I do this in combination with a lot of other gallbladder points. It's the earth point. It's also the influential point of the sinews. It is, it's interestingly enough, one sun below this on the right is where you find the first aid point for the gallbladder. Right, so somebody's having a gallbladder attack. You would palpate about an inch, a sun or so below gallbladder 34, and needle deeply into that point, and that is for gallbladder attacks, like acute issues affecting the gallbladder, like a gallstone attack, right? But this is said to harmonize the earth and the wood, right? So the earthy qualities of what you eat are kind of like the fats, and the fats are the hardest thing to digest. Also, like, this is the influential point of the sinews. What are the sinews? The sinews, for those of you who eat meat, it's like the gristle. Like, if anybody of you has ever eaten a steak, maybe a cheaper cut of steak, and you all of a sudden you take a bite of something and you got this like chewy thing that you could chew it for half an hour and you're just not able to chew it up and digest it. That's the sinews. That's gristle. That's what gristle is. It's the sinews. And this represents on a, so like gallbladder 34 is also really known for, as the Hosea point, also for like gallbladder issues. You know, this is a point that's done very commonly for issues affecting the gallbladder, right? Stagnation in the gallbladder organ. It's said to benefit the joints and the sinews as the influential point. It's said to spread the liver chi, of course. But it's also like, if you think about the earth, like the earth represents like, and again, damp and heat, especially heat, affects the liver and gallbladder. And so you add heat to moisture, and already spleen chi deficient person who can't transform and transport their food well, and then damp accumulates, right? And also their diet is a very damp or damp hot diet. You know, they're eating like, you know, sriracha flavored cheese fries, right? I mean, that's like, please let me obtund my gallbladder and liver, right? And then maybe throw it down with like a shot of tequila, like just really just to put the cherry on the top, right? That damp heat cherry on the top. So, you know, damp, heavy foods, fried, greasy foods, these are all represent the hardest things to digest. Also things that create a lot of heat, like they don't call it fire water for nothing, right? So, you know, these are hard to process. And if you have a weak spleen and deficient spleen and stomach to begin with, you're already predisposed to dampness. So you add heat to this moisture and this damp, and then you get like damp heat and phlegm. And that is like mud in the system. And that is the hardest thing to process. It's the hardest thing to digest. It's the hardest thing to resolve. So on a mental, emotional level, or psychological, spiritual level, this represents the most challenging issues that are like the hardest to resolve. So these might be personal tendencies, addictions, cravings, the things that make us feel comfortable. Again, earth is about what allows us to pause and feel full and satisfied and comfortable, right? So these are like comfort foods, or generally tend to be the most damp. You know, no one goes, yeah, celery is my comfort food, you know? No, right? No. Like a what is that? Like a grilled cheese, right, is comfort food, right? Mac and cheese is comfort food. Mac and cheese with like a lobster roll and a beer is, you know what I mean? Like that's, yeah, milk, like a hot chocolate, right? That's comfort food, right? No one goes, yeah, you know, like I don't know, like no one turns to club soda for comfort, comfort, right? You know what I mean? I want something heavy, you know, I want something comforting, I want something filling, because it soothes, right? Unfortunately, like if it soothes too much, it becomes binding. And so all the issues in your life, maybe it's your beloved, maybe it's how you relate to your beloved, maybe it's your financial circumstances, maybe it's a tendency or an addiction you have, maybe it's, you know, your love of macrame, I don't know, whatever it is, right? Like something is like hard to change, hard to move, right? Earth doesn't like change. Earth doesn't want to change. Like Earth wants to, let's just sit and think about it a little more. I don't know if I want to take action quite yet, right? So this is the point to help deal with the gristle in life. For your tendencies that you hate to do, that you know they're not right for you, you know it's awful, you know in the long term it's just lousy, but in the short term it's like, oh yeah, right? Right? So you know, this can get in our joints, it gets in our tissues, it gets in our muscles, right? And so this you know, this is not something that you can just like think better thoughts. This isn't something that's going to go away with, like, what do they call those? Positive affirmations, right? So, you know, there's only a couple ways to deal with damp. You can either drain it or resolve it, right? And so draining it is like you've loosened it up where you can kind of then move it just enough where you can get it into like the intestines or the bladder to excrete it out, right? So you've made it just light enough, you've budged the boulder just enough where you can kind of roll it down the intestinal hill, and then hopefully like the intestines and the bladder can excrete it out. Or you can try to resolve it, which is sort of like dissolve it, right? And that's the traditional ways of dealing with damp and phlegm. And so the damp is all of the latent and really stuck things that can't be simply drained, right? Right? It's you know, these are the things that like they have to be worn down and broken up and dissolved slowly over time, right? So these are like the tendencies that you have to apply yourself and move through this state of discomfort. You've got to move, you've got to slog through the mud for a little while before you can like really like break this habit down. And you have to really apply yourself, right? This is the persistent aspect of the gallbladder, right? That like wants to keep moving with the liver, like keep moving forward, step after step, right? Think about walk between and Valiant stream, like those, the Ying spring points, right? These help us like one step after another, one step after another, one step after another, right? So it's like this commitment to like, okay, I'm just going to keep going. You can't just snap your fingers and change here, right? We need to be in relationship. Again, earth allows us to be in relationship. Wood allows us to be in relationship. It's interestingly enough that they're both in this middle burner, which is like the pivot between the upper and the lower, right? You have to be in relationship with your opposition. You can't just like lob, you know, rocks at them. You can't just like lob rocks at them. Hold on one second. Here you go. Here you go. Sorry, I stole my wife's clipboard. You can't just like lob rocks at this from afar, right? Hold on one second. I just need to pause this for a second. There you go. Okay? Okay. All right. Matrimonial bliss restored. Okay. All right. So, so these are things that like require some effort, right? You have to be in relationship. You have to integrate, right? The way to dissolve it, like you can't, something can't be dissolved outside its medium, outside of the solvent, right? You have to absorb, you have to like integrate, you have to take it in. And that's what earth allows us to do, right? We see it, we smell it, we chew on it, we swallow it, it's in us, right? So you've got to like embrace your shadow. You've got to embrace your negative habits. You've got to take it in and get to know it. You got to know it intimately. You got to really like get in there and work with it, right? And be with it. You have to bring it into your center. And that's ironically like where the power lies to transform it, right? So you have to be in relationship with your opposition. You can't just like yell at them on Facebook, you know, stand on your high horse and say, down with these people. I mean, you can do that, but don't expect any kind of change or result. I mean, that will help move your chi. So great. So you don't stroke out that day. That's good. But it's not going to make any change. It's not going to resolve the issue, right? You have to be in a relationship. I think about this guy. I read about him. He actually like was single-handedly like responsible for dismantling like this large chapter of the KKK, who's the African-American guy, he developed relationships with these people. And, you know, that takes some guts. I mean, you know, these people are like, you know, like down with people who look like you, like, you know, we're committed to like, you know, segregating away from people who look like you, or even killing people who look like you. But he resolved that damp phlegm by being in relationship to it, right? And so this is something that happens slowly over time. And so similarly, gallbladder 34 is the influential point of the sinews, and that's the gristle that we sometimes get, you know, that like life gives us by fate, but then our destiny is created by what you do with that. So, you know, how do you deal with the things that are really tough for you to deal with? Do you resign? Do you go into blame? Do you go into collapse? And when I say you, I mean also your patients, right? But, or are you going to like persistently like chew away at this, right? It takes some effort. Does this make sense? Any questions about that? Really? No questions or comments? His name is Daryl Davis. Yes, yes. I don't know if it was like West Virginia or whatever. Yeah, they started by discussing blues music. So they found a way in. So what is the, you have to be able to see where there's commonality. Like, again, you know, the liver and gallbladder are about differentiation. But differentiation isn't just about like what separates, what's this from that. It also is about what do we have in common, right? Because if you think about conflict, right, it's con is with, right? You're with the face of someone, right? You're facing them. You have to face that which you oppose, or go around it, or go above it, or go. But you have to, like, that's connected. There's no mental way of it doing this, right? There's no formula for it, right? You have to go inside, and sometimes, you know, the heart has reasons that reason knows not, right? So the heart and the liver in communication, gallbladder too to some degree, but the gallbladder then is in communication to the liver. So, you know, sometimes you have to create change, to resolve something, you have to face it in a way that might be different than your conditioned mind is comfortable with. And so gallbladder 34 really excels at that. And that kind of brings me to another point, which is gallbladder 30, jumping circle. What does Deadman call it? Encircling leap, right? So this point, if you watch someone walk from the side, if you put like a little Sharpie dot, right, and you could see their hip, when they walk, it kind of goes like this, right? It doesn't, it's not just this point that moves, right? It's like this circle, right? It creates this circle as you move the hips and the legs. And this is about bringing chi to the hip and the hip joint in a way that allows us to move not just with flexibility, but with power. All powerful movements start with the hip. Any that you've done dance, martial arts, right? Gymnastics, right? You have to stabilize the hips. And all movement, like whether it's a punch or a kick, it all starts with the movement of really it all starts with the dantian, and especially the lower dantian. But where does the lower dantian branch out to? Like, is the hips, right? So like all powerful movement really comes from the hips, right? So this really helps people to be powerful, to move forward in their life, to not get stuck, right? If you think about bursitis, you know, hip tendonitis, right? Arthritis, or as they say in Baltimore, arthritis, right? I got the arthritis, right? I got the diabetes, right? So this is a really great point for, like, you know, kind of connecting with our inner horse, right? Our inner equine nature, which is like very strong, very graceful. You know, you think about like horses like at a, what is that called? Like a steeplechase. But also there's another competition, I can't remember what it is, where they jump over the bars and stuff. It's not steeplechase. I can't remember what it's called, but you know what I'm talking about. Like the horses that go around the track with the rider, and you see like in the English style, and they're jumping over like these poles and these obstacles, right? So they're leaping over it. So, you know, this gives power of people to like leap forward in life. To like, and that may not be a loud, wild thing. It might not be a loud, you know, extravagant, attention-getting thing. It might be saying, you know, I'm declaring myself an acupuncturist now. I'm putting myself out there on Facebook. You're taking that leap, right? But you're looking and leaping at the same time, right? So it's not leaping without looking. I mean, the gallbladder and the liver open to the eyes for a reason. So you want to seize the day, but you also really want to know where you're going, right? You want to look before you leap, but you also don't want to make sure you like don't not leap, right? So this really gives people a lot of like flexibility in their body. You know, this is a really good point for tonifying the chi and blood in the hip area. It helps to open the daimai, which is another, the girdling vessel, which also is opened by gallbladder 41, interestingly enough. It's really good for moving a lot of channel obstruction. Why is that? Because we hold a lot of things in our joints. We stash a lot of things in our joints. That's why gallbladder 34 is so powerful. So there's something called the divergent meridians. You're going to learn about them later, but it's another type of meridian that takes any potentially threatening pathogenic factor that's coming in from the outside or that's being generated internally from your crappy diet and what you eat, drink, and breathe that's really awful for you. And so instead of that pathogenic, internal or external pathogenic factor making its way to your internal organs where it really creates havoc, where it really creates problems, right? Hepatitis, SIBO, IBS, things like that, lung cancer, right? Stomach cancer, ulcers. So before it gets to that point, the divergent meridians, if they're strong, allows, it kind of diverts, that's why its name is divergent, it diverts this pathogenic factor away from the internal organs and it stashes it in the next least bad place, which is the joints, the bones, and eventually the muscles, right? So it's like saying, well, instead of hepatitis, I'm going to give you arthritis. You know, instead of like an ulcer, I'm going to give you maybe, you know, GERD, or I'm going to give you maybe hip issues, right? Like hip arthritis, bursitis, right? So that's why it removes channel obstructions. It's like it taps into, you know, gallbladder 34, gallbladder 30, into the divergent meridian aspects of things to unlock and break out and like move out these things that are latent. And you could also think about that, not just latent pathogenic factors as a physical thing, but also latent pathological ways of thinking, right? Old stories, old tapes that are self-limiting, or that keep you, that are maybe prejudiced, like, oh, you know, like this type of person did that to me in the past, so now I'm prejudiced against that type of person. You know, people that drive red cars, or people that look like this, or that are part of that religion, or what nationality, or whatever, right? So, you know, that person with the red car could be your next best friend, right? You know, so you never know. It helps to move past this obtunding force that is damp and heat that interferes with our ability to see past our judgments. All right. And similarly, this is a good point for sciatica, along with gallbladder 34, because now we've got this like weakness, this debilitation that's now spreading. That's wind or wind heat, like that radiating pain, that radiating numbness, wind damp, that radiating fiery heat, wind heat, right? Okay. So I will continue on with the rest of this later. And we will also, let's see, yeah, we'll get caught up, and then I'm gonna, I keep promising to do this, but I will upload some more videos. I'm just working on some editing issues, but I wanna upload some videos on the rest of the gallbladder points as well as the outer bladder line points, okay? So any questions before we end? Y'all still hanging in there? Just in the chat, just give me a thumbs up or a yes or a no.
I'm going to give it to you right here. Thumbs up. It's really good.
I know it's a lot. I know we're like sitting for a long period of time.
Question, something you said earlier, just really, really quick. When we're talking about gallbladder 41, and you were using an example that if it was, let's say, the pain originated in that, you would use the Shaoyan point in combination, and I was just the TE3 gallbladder.
Oh, you mean the Shaoyang
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
If actually everybody could give me like a thumbs up or a yes or no in the chat, that would be good, by the way, just so because I can't see all of you at the same time. So if this is making sense or not, like you can send it to me privately, like, oh my God, I don't understand any of this, right? So the shoe point combination is you do this on the side that's affected,
Right.
you do the shoe point on the meridian, on the meridian of the side that's affected, and then you do its shoe point on the opposite side of its 6-division pair. So if I sprained my ankle and I felt it on the medial side, like say kidney, I do kidney 3, and kidney is the foot xiao yin. So I would do the shoe point on the heart xiao yin complement on the opposite side, which would be heart 7. Right? If it was bladder, I do bladder 65 on the affected side, and I do small intestine 3 on the opposite side.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. I know this is a lot. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. We're sitting for a long period of time. Believe me, my own back is on fire. You know, I get it. I can't wait to get up and stretch and move around. But I thank you for hanging in there. I'm going to be doing some more videos. So what I'm going to try and do next time is do like a bunch of short videos that add up to the period of time like that normally would be like the course. So we'll do a little bit, you know, in person, and then you can like watch the videos that add up to the period of time that's, you know, for the rest of the class, because it's a 3-hour class. And we're kind of approaching that now. We're 3 minutes away. All right. Tips. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, these are meant to be like reference notes, right? And I want you to think about like how to think about the points. You don't have to memorize, oh yeah,
Right.
it does all these things. You're not going to be able to memorize that. I can't memorize all that. So, but maybe you have better memory than me. But it's more about how to think about the points, and that helps you to use them. Okay?
Right. Thank
All
you.
right.